Today we're doing lesson 7.3, special products of polynomials. Now here's the good news. We're going to continue multiplying binomials, all right, which you did in lesson 7.2. But today I'm going to teach you some shortcuts, all right? Not that foiling is incredibly difficult, which that is the method that you learned in lesson 7.2. However, there is, for some problems, a quicker way than foiling. And that's what I'm going to teach you today. But before we get to that, let's see what you remember, all right? And this is not in your notes. This is just up on the screen, so just follow along and listen. First of all, I need you to tell me what a binomial is, because the foiling that you learned in 7.2 and the shortcuts that you're going to learn today are only going to work if you are multiplying two binomials. So you have to know what a binomial is.
Binomial, it has like two addition signs or like two subtraction signs.
Not necessarily. You're on the right track. Mason?
Like two expressions.
Okay, it's one expression.
Oh.
But it has two what? Two terms. Okay, remember those words we learned in lesson 7.1? I told you got to learn them because you're going to keep hearing them over and over. This is a perfect example, okay? You also learned in 7.1 what a binomial was. It is an expression with two terms, all right? So that's the first thing you got to know. It's two, or it has two terms. Now, what is the method that we use to multiply two binomials? And this is what you learned in 7.2. So if you need to flip back, feel free. But that would be x plus 2 times x plus 3 would be an example of you multiplying two binomials. So what method did we learn to use when multiplying two binomials? Lily? FOIL. Okay, we learned how to FOIL. And this is what we were practicing in yesterday's assignment. Okay, we multiplied the first terms together, the outside terms, the inside terms, and the last terms. Once we multiplied, then we found in the middle, if we had done it correctly, the middle two terms were like terms that we then added or subtracted and put them together. All right? But you also learned in 7.2 what to do if it was a binomial times a trinomial. What's a trinomial? This is an expression with three terms. Very good. So that would be x plus 2 times something like x squared plus 3x plus 6. Now, does foiling work if one's a binomial, one's a trinomial? No. So what was the method that you learned in 7.2? The distributive property. Okay, we learned that we had to distribute. All right, we already knew the distributive property, but we learned we had to distribute. So we had to do x times all three terms behind it, and we had to do the 2 times all three terms behind it. Now the reason I'm reiterating is because we're going to practice some more tomorrow, but also, like I said, the shortcuts that you're about to learn are not going to work unless you are multiplying two binomials. So the essential question says, what are the patterns in the special products? And right here you can see a plus b times a minus b. That's you multiplying two binomials. And this is something you haven't seen. What happens when it's a plus b raised to the second power or a minus b raised to the second power? Now, that leads us into the very first shortcut. When you have a square of a binomial. Now listen, it's exactly what it says. It's a binomial and it's going to be squared, which means it's going to be raised to what power? The second. When something is squared, it is raised to the second power. And so you see that right here. You're either going to have a plus b raised to the second power, or you're going to have a minus b raised to the second power. So notice the difference is just that symbol in the middle. Sometimes it's going to be plus, and sometimes it's going to be minus. Now, look at the answers for both of these. Whether the problem starts out as an addition problem or the problem starts out as a subtraction problem, let's kind of examine the answers to both. Okay? You'll notice, or you should notice, both answers will have a squared. Both have a 2 times a times b. Both have a b squared. And what's the second sign in both of these answers? Addition. So what is literally the only difference between these two answers? The what sign? Which sign though? The answers have two signs. So the only difference is which signs? Okay, listen to me. Listen to what I'm saying. You've got the first sign and you've got the second sign. We already said the second signs are both positive. So that means the only difference in your two answers are the what? The first sign. Because the first sign, this is a plus and this is a minus. Now, look at what it matches up with. Whatever the sign in the original problem, that's the first sign in your answer. All right? So if I would highlight, I would do exactly what I've done up on the screen to make it stand out. If the original problem starts with a minus sign, look at what the first sign in your answer is. It's a minus sign. Okay? Now, there's one other thing I want you to know about both of these shortcuts. Foiling will still work. So if you get to a point on a quiz or a test and you completely freeze and you're like, I can't remember the shortcuts, foiling will work. Now that might be a little confusing though when you look at the square of a binomial, but let's talk about it for a second. If this is a plus b raised to the second power, what does that actually mean? If we were going to write it out, I would call it the long way. What does it actually mean? No? All right. Think about back in chapter 6 when we learned about exponents and I gave you 4 squared. What does that actually mean? 4 times 4, right? You take the base and you multiply it by itself. So think about that. The base is a binomial. It's a plus b, but it's raised to the second power. So what does that actually mean if I wanted to write it out the long way?
A plus b times b.
No, we're getting closer. A plus b times a plus b. You take the binomial times itself. Now do you see why foiling would work? Because you're multiplying 2 binomials. So put that same thing into a minus b squared. What does that mean if I were to write it out the long way? A minus b times a minus b. I just have to take the binomial times itself, and then I would be able to FOIL. All right? More work, but I can still FOIL. Now, let's look at the steps to the shortcut, because there are 3 steps. And again, the more you practice, the quicker and the better you're going to get at this. But I want you to highlight these 3 steps, and I want you to highlight them separately, not one big line, because I want them to stand out. The first step is to square the first term. So whatever is in the spot of the a, the first term, you're going to square it. You're then going to multiply and double the 2 terms together. Now the middle term is the one that is going to require work from you. It's the only spot where you're going to have to show me work. But I need you to understand what it means. Multiply and double the 2 terms together. When you see the word double, what does that mean we're going to do? Double it means we're going to multiply it by 2. So we're going to take the 2 terms, multiply them together, and then we're going to multiply by 2. Now, please add this in your notes, because the biggest mistake I see here, I see people multiply the terms together, and then I see them square it. And that's not what you're supposed to do for the middle term. You're supposed to double it, which means you're going to multiply by 2. And then the third and final step, you are going to square the second term. So whatever is in the spot where b is, that is considered your second term, and you're going to square it. Now, we'll practice that in just a second. Let's talk about the other shortcut you're going to see in this lesson. It's called the difference of squares pattern. Now, go back to elementary for a second. If I ask you for the difference, I'm asking you for the answer to what kind of a problem? Subtraction. Okay, so that's why skipping over the formula, go straight to your answer here. Do you see what sign is in the middle of your 2 terms? Subtraction. And it will be every single time. Because you'll also notice with the difference of squares, there's only one formula. Now, looking at the formula, a minus b times a plus b, what do you notice about your 2 binomials? Is anything else different? No. Everything is the same except for one has a minus sign and one has a plus sign. Okay? So, your answer, to get your answer, you're going to square the first term, then you're going to square the second term. And you're going to put a minus sign. Your answer will always be a subtraction problem because it's the difference of squares. Now let's talk about this for a second, because we've already said we can FOIL on these problems. So let me talk you through foiling. If we were to FOIL, let's go ahead and write down FOIL next to this formula, because we technically, even with the shortcut, I don't know what I'm spelling, sorry. even with the shortcut, we're technically still foiling. Okay? But you'll notice in the answer, there is no middle term. So what do you think happens when we FOIL and we get the middle terms that we are supposed to be able to add together? If there's never a middle term in your answer, what do you think happened to the outside terms and the inside terms? But what did they do when you combine them? They canceled. That's why they're not there. So you're like, Ms. Johnson, I just want to think about foiling. Fine. FOIL the difference of squares, but don't do the O and the I. Don't multiply the outside terms or the inside terms. Just multiply the first terms and multiply the last terms. Because essentially, guess what you're going to be doing? Squaring the first term and squaring the second term. Okay? Now, if you're visual like me, you're probably a little bit confused. So let's go practice these. Example number 1 says, write the square of the binomial. So right there in the problem, it tells you the shortcut to use. And it says, write it as a trinomial. So it's telling you that your answer should have how many terms? 3. All right, so if it doesn't, then you know you've done something wrong. Because let me go ahead and show you right off the bat, and do not write this down, but let me go ahead and show you right off the bat the answers that I see. I see this right here. I see x squared plus 49. But we know from the formulas and from what the directions tell us that if we have the square of a binomial, our answer should be a trinomial. So please, please, please do not just square the first term and square the second term. That's not this shortcut. All right, now, first things first. What type of a problem are we dealing with? Addition or subtraction?
Addition.
Okay, and that'll come in to play here in just a second. Now, let's follow the steps. And for this first problem, we are going to write down all of our work, okay, so we can see exactly what we're doing. Step number 1 says I'm supposed to do what? Look at your notes right there in front of you, highlighted. What's it tell you to do? Square the first term. What is the first term? So let's write the first term down, put it in parentheses, and let's raise it to the second power because we're going to square it. What is the symbol that we should bring down? Remember, the original problem, whatever the sign is, that is going to be the first sign in our answer. So let's bring it down so that we don't have to worry about it while we do the middle part. Okay, because we're multiplying and doubling. So we're multiplying the terms together. Here's the question. What are the terms that we're multiplying together? 7 and x are the two terms that we multiply together. Now guys, what do you get when you do 7 times x?
7x.
You get 7x. So let's write 7x. But leave a space because we're going to put it in parentheses and we're supposed to double it, which means we're supposed to... No, that's not what we wrote down in our notes. We're supposed to multiply by 2. And I'm actually okay that you said that because that's the mistake that gets made. So that's why I'm emphasizing this right here. You multiply the two terms together and you double, which means you multiply by 2. Now, what is the second sign always going to be in our answer? Positive. Okay? We said that at the beginning too, but again, think about why. What is the third step in this process?
You just square the
Square the second term. Go back to the original problem. What is the second term in the original problem? 7 is the second term, and we're going to raise it to the second power because we're going to square it. Okay? Now, this is the part right here, and I'm going to highlight it. You can highlight it or make yourself a note. This is the part that I don't necessarily have to see in homework, quizzes, and tests. But I want it in your notes. Okay? It's not optional for your notes because I need you to see exactly what we did. All right? Now, let's just do the math that's left. X squared is going to stay x squared. What is 2 times 7x?
14x.
14x. And what is 7 squared?
49.
And that's the final answer. Let's FOIL this just for comparison's sake. All right? X plus 7 squared actually means x plus 7 times what? X plus 7. So let's FOIL it. Javon, what are the first terms that we're going to multiply together if we think through the FOIL process?
X times x.
Which is?
X squared.
All right, what are my outside terms?
7 and 7.
Outside. They're going to be on the, you've gone to the last terms already. What are the outside terms?
X.
And?
X. I'm at 7.
X and 7 are the outside terms, which gives me 7x. All right, what are the inside terms?
X. I'm at 7. and x.
Right here, right on the inside, right beside each other. So that is also a positive 7x. And what are the last terms?
7, 7.
Which gives me
49.
49. So again, as I FOIL, my middle two terms should be like terms. And when I combine them, Javon, what do I get?
You get 7. I'm at 14x with 49.
Good. Is that not the same answer I got earlier? But I got to the answer much quicker. You say, well, it didn't feel much quicker. It will once you learn those steps and you see how quickly you're going to move through them. Okay? But again, I wanted you to see foiling would get you the same exact answer. So if all else fails, you can FOIL. Now, let's pick up the pace on letter B. And so let's just talk through this. What is step number 1? What is the first term that we're going to square? Now remember, we're squaring the entire term. So please don't just square the number or just square the letter. You've got to square them the entire term. So what is 4x squared going to give me? 16x squared. That means I have squared the 4 and I have squared the x. So make sure you square everything in the term. Now, what was the original problem? What was the sign in the original problem? So what am I bringing down first? A minus. All right. Now I can just focus on multiplying and doubling. So what am I multiplying together this time? 4x and y. So literally 4x times y is 4xy. Now notice where I'm writing it down. Remember I told you the middle is where you got to show me work. So you're showing me the work over to the side. So what am I supposed to do with the 4xy? I double it, which means I'm doing what?
8x.
I'm multiplying by 2. Okay? Write it down. Again, if your middle term ends up being wrong and I can't see what you did, it's very difficult to give you any partial credit, which I want to do. So show me this. This is the only work I'm asking you to show me on these problems. So you can handle that. All right, now do the math. What is 2 times 4xy? 8xy. And what's the second sign always in our answer?
Addition.
Plus. All right, and what is the last thing we're supposed to do? Square the second term. Now remember, go back to the original problem. All of these steps have to do with the original problem. What is the second term in the original problem? So when I square that, I get y squared. And this is your final answer. Letter C. What do we get on letter C? Logan. All right, stop right there. You squared the first term. You squared both parts of it, so 9m squared. What sign did you bring down? Okay, it was an addition problem to start with, so the plus sign comes down. Talk to me about how you got the middle term.
I did 2 times 3 and n.
All right, so when you multiply the two terms together, that was 3m and n. So that's 3 times m times n, and then you doubled it by multiplying by 2. Again, that's the only work I'm asking to see, so make sure you write it in your notes so you don't forget to do it on your homework and your quizzes and your tests. And what did that give you? 6mn. What sign did you bring down for the second? Plus. All right. And how did you finish?
N squared.
The second term was n. You square it, and you're finished. Difference of squares. Example 2 says, find the product. Now here's what I need you to understand. All right. You've got to look for this shortcut. Because when you get your quiz next week and your test next week, those are going to be the directions. It's going to say find the product. And I'm going to just put all sorts of binomials down. I'm going to have x plus 2 times x plus 3. I'm going to have 3x plus 2 times x minus 1. And then I'm going to throw in something like x minus 10 times x plus 10. So what are you looking for? What do you notice right off the bat about letter A? Give me more. What do you see? What can you tell me about letter A? The signs are the only thing that's different. So you should be looking for this, because if I can find these types of binomials, I know a shortcut. Okay? Nothing is different about these two sets of parentheses except for the signs, and that is the difference of squares. Now, you got to be careful, because if I threw a 2 in there, would it be a shortcut problem anymore? No. Okay, it has to match exactly, except for one's going to be plus and one's going to be minus. That's the other thing. What if they were both plus signs? Would the shortcut work? No. Okay? So you've got to be very careful. Everything has to match except for the signs. Now, let's think about the shortcut. I'm supposed to square the first term. I'm supposed to square the second term and put a minus sign between them. Here's the question. Does it matter which parentheses I look at?
No.
Aren't my terms the same?
No.
So it doesn't really matter. So let's look at the first set of parentheses. What is the first term that I'm supposed to square? So I'm going to put x and I'm going to raise it to the second power. We already talked about the sign is always going to be minus because it's the difference of squares. And what is the second term that I'm supposed to square? No, I already brought the minus sign down, so I don't have to worry about signs. What is the second term? 10, and I'm going to square it. Now again, this would be that piece that I don't necessarily need to see on quizzes and tests, but I want it in your notes for a reference point, okay? X squared just stays, everybody, x squared just stays squared. Bring down the minus sign. What's 10 squared? 100. There's your final answer. Now, let's FOIL it, again, for comparison's sake. What are the first terms if I were to FOIL this problem? X times x, which is x squared. What are the outside terms? Nope, the outside is in a negative 10, which gives me? What are the inside terms? Reagan?
Negative 10 and x.
Which gives me?
Negative 10x.
Good. And Ashton, what are my last terms?
Negative 10 and 10.
And that gives me?
Negative 100.
Negative 100. Now, I have FOILed, and if I've done it correctly, my middle two terms should be alike, and they are. What is 10x minus 10x?
0.
Which is what's going to happen every single time if I FOIL the difference of squares. Is that not the same exact answer that I got with the shortcut? And how much quicker was the shortcut? Okay, so again, like I said, if you freeze on the quiz or test, fine, FOIL. But I want you to see the shortcut is going to save you so much time and leave you less room for errors. All right, go do letter B and C. I'm going to give you 60 seconds, and you should have B and C done in those 60 seconds. All right, letter B. Kendall, what'd you guys get with the shortcut?
X squared minus 9y.
All right, we got x squared minus 9y. Now, here's my only problem. You didn't square everything in the term. You squared the 3, but you didn't square the y.
Y squared.
All right, don't forget, you have to square the entire term. So, x squared is x squared. 3y squared is 9y squared. And again, the minus sign is always in the middle of my answer. Now, remember a minute ago, we talked about how you could still FOIL this if FOILing is what you understand, but you would remove the O and the I, okay? What are the first terms in this problem? If I was to multiply the first terms, I'd be multiplying what? X times x. Which, everyone, what's x times x? X squared. And then I would go to the last terms. What are the last terms here? 3y and negative 3y. Which when I multiply 3y and negative 3y, I get negative 9y squared. So either way you want to look at it, you should arrive at the same answer. Now, letter C. Anthony, what did you guys get for letter C? First term is 2x. When I square it, I get 4x squared. What's my second term?
1.
And when I square it, I get 1. And what goes in the middle? Minus, always. There's your answer. 4x squared minus 1. You take the first term of 2x, you square it, square both parts. 2x is 4x squared, and you square the second term, which is a 1, put a minus sign between them, and you're finished. And that is lesson 7.3.